no matter what you're doing in agriculture today, precision agriculture is certainly a big topic. And it's certainly important because we're asked today, and we're going to be asked, particularly in the markets that we have right now, is that you want to do more with less. You want to produce more with less input. And I think no matter how you look at it, everybody should be interested in that. How I can do more with less. Because I know I'm going to get less at the marketplace, so I've got to put less in. But if I can get more, then I'm doing the right things. And so as we go along tonight, you'll be getting some return on investment sheets. You're going to be getting some data that you're going to be able to look over and get back with the rep that you're working with, and we'll step through those hoops as we go tonight. But anyway, what's that mean to growers? Well, it means this. Two things particularly. We're going to do more precision placement of our nutrients, how we feed the plants that we have, whether we have grass plants, whether we have legumes, whether we're doing whatever we're doing, we've got to be more precise in how we feed them and do it with less so we can gain more. And the other process is something that's not been addressed in agriculture very well at all, and that's water management. And that's managing the water that you get. Now, when you say that we work a lot with irrigation guys, and we do a lot more with dryland guys. And I said, there's two ways to get water. You're praying for it or you're paying for it. Okay, the irrigation guys, all they have to do is flip a switch, and they get what they want. Although it costs them, but those of us in the dryland business, we're praying for it, and it comes 5 inches at a time, or not at all. Seems like so we have to work with that moisture and do better with it. Now, there's some conservation techniques that you may be used to, whether it's terracing or whatever that we do in the conservation level, but that's not water management. What I want to get down to is precision, how I actually manage the water in the profile of the soil, how that water can work for me when it's not been working for me before, and we'll cross those bridges as we go along. But those two subjects are, if you'll read your trade journals, you're going to find these subjects tied into a number of different articles, okay? So to give you a little example of why what we're looking at here, from 1925 to 1950, that 25-year span, the basic average corn yield was about 40 bushel to the acre. From 1950 to 1975, we got it up to about 80 bushel, so we doubled it. The next 25 to 30-year span, from 75 to 2005, we doubled it again to about 160 bushel to the acre is the average in North America. And the question is, can we get to 300 bushel corn in the next 20 so years or so? And if you'd asked somebody in 1975 if you thought the average corn yield would be 160 bushel to the acre, they'd have said, no, I don't think so. But when you look at that, the reason those things have happened is, one, technology, and the two is we get better at what we do because we get more with less. Now, if you look at the commodity prices for corn, how much did the commodity price of corn change from 2005 to 1950? There wasn't a lot of change. Somewhere in that $2 to $2.50 to $3 range at times. It kind of bumped up and down all the way through there. So the only way for growers and farmers to stay competitive is they have to continue to increase their yields to meet the market price, to make money in the market. And so, but our market's changed a little bit. Of course, we got up to the magical $7 range, in the last couple of years ago. But the process is now we're back down in that $3 to $4 range, and we're having to learn to make money again at that level. And the growers are looking for different things to do today with the technology that's available. One of the things in the industry, you've got to look at test data, you've got to look at research that helps you make good decisions. And one of the areas that we have a lot of research and a lot of good information, and it's not our research. I've been to a lot of farmer meetings where I've looked at their data and I'm saying, well, who did the testing? And they said, well, it's our testing, our test results. I was like, well, that's, I'm not really fond of that because, that's their test results. I'm looking for an independent test facility. I'm looking for something that I can, they put their stamp of approval on it from an independent research process. So the Irrigation Research Foundation, which if you're familiar with that, is one of the premier facilities in the country, but not because they do just irrigation testing. They do dryland testing, drip irrigation, circle irrigation, and so on. But the interesting part was, this is in the nation's largest corn growing county. It's also, they do have impartial testing. Colorado State Ag Department tests there, the USDA tests there, every major chemical, seed, and agricultural company. does testing there. And the reason they do is because they have an unusual combination of procedures that they use that gives them some advantages over other facilities. One, they're large plot, meaning that it's not test tube testing. It's not a plot here and a plot here. It is actual testing with large field operations and also large equipment, so it duplicates more of what on-farm operations are doing today. All the test plots are available to farmers all year long, and they're all published online every year, every research. So if you want to look at Pioneer, you want to look at Syngenta, you want to look at Dow, you want to look at chemical tests from almost every major chemical company is going to be available to you online if you want to see those results. The neat part about it is they have unusual test combinations and possibilities. It's also the nation's only nonprofit co-op funded testing facility. So they hold a pretty good number there. And they have no affiliation with a university, government agency, or outside source. It's completely farmer owned and operated, and they have to turn a profit to stay in business. So, but it's a neat facility. But when I tell you guys, I said this information is coming from the IRF, that's where this information is coming from, okay? Now, we have other test data, and we have other test facilities, but at the end of the day, tonight, okay, rather than me go through every test and everything that's been done since 1997, you can have one of these sheets that tells you every test that's been done since 1997. And that's approaching 20 years ago. Next year, it'll be 20 years. So, the testing results are across the board in a number of different areas and a number of different combinations, and you're going to be able to take that home with you. So when I go back to that two things, nutrient management and water management, the biggest enemy for both of those, nutrients and water management, is compaction today. It's one of the biggest enemies there is out there. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit, because what are the growers' options? You know, if you're in the production farming business and you have tillage operations, you have options that way. If you're in the cattle business and you have pastures or hay ground, you don't have as many options to relieve those compaction problems and to do things differently, okay? We know that the industry has been paying attention to this because this tractor came out 35 years ago. That's how long they started to recognize that we have compaction problems. As equipment has gotten bigger and our practices have become different, we've put a lot more pressure on our soils. In fact, you can tell right there that we used to go fix equipment on those days, but now we go play in the mud because we can. Our technology will allow us to do it. It's like my dad always said, well, we had pretty good pastures until we got four-wheel drive pickups. Okay, so we're putting pressure on things today that we didn't do 15, 20 years ago. And I always ask growers, I said, how many of y'all have a little bit larger equipment than you had 20 years ago? Okay, I mean, your neighbors have larger equipment. You know, and all equipment kind of moves, you know, it moves down through the system, and we know that. And there's growers that still use smaller equipment. But the bottom line is that because of our technology, we're putting pressure on the ground when it's got more moisture in it, and it's causing us some issues that I always tell folks, I said, if you go out into a pasture, you can fertilize the snot out of it, and you can hope for all the water you want. But if you have compaction, you can't overcome that. You cannot overcome that with more fertilizer and or more water. You have to deal with that problem and issue. So we can do dumb things, and we can move forward. I said, you know, how many pounds is on the ground in that picture, particularly when they're full? The cart's full and the combine's full. You're talking well over 250,000 pounds on the ground, you know, with a not a lot of a bigger footprint tire size wise. And so, but we're running up and down almost every row with some form of equipment today, doing things that we've not done before. But there's different levels of compaction. There's different things that happen that and that I'll show you that is kind of important. But that little slide right there was done by the USDA in 1995. And interestingly enough, you know, it there says, and that's in 1995, that 95% of corn ground in the U.S. has some form of compaction. And that picture has 3 levels of compaction in it. One is a surface compaction caused by probably a hard rain, because hard rains, and you guys have seen that when, particularly after you've planted, when it crusts hard rain has a high PSI, so it can cause some compaction. There's probably a light tillage operation that caused this compaction zone, whether it be a field cultivator, hoe system, or something at that level. And then this level is what I would call old school, or what we call plow pan or hard pan compaction zones at about the 8 to 12 inch level. And that zone there is about 2 to 3 inches thick. And it's very prevalent in a lot of fields today, but it's much worse than it was 25 years ago, or 20 years ago when this picture was taken. And we've kind of addressed the reasons why. But let's do some basic understanding of that picture, okay? Number one, how many gallons of water does it take one corn plant to reach its genetic potential? How many gallons of water does that plant need to grow as large and produce as much as it could possibly produce? And it's most folks don't really know that number, but 55 gallons per plant. 55 gallons per plant. And if you look at the water necessary to do that, if you have a 30,000 population in an acre, that means you got 30,000 times 55 gallons. It's about 1.6 million gallons of water in an acre to produce that. Okay? Now, 28,000 gallons is 1 acre inch of water. For every inch of water you have on an acre is 28,000 gallons of water. All right? So if it takes 1.6 million gallons of water in an acre for that corn to have the full genetic potential, you know, how many inches of water is that going to take? Okay? Actually. So about 60 inches. Well, depending on the part of the country you're in, you may not reach that level, particularly during the growing season. Here's what my irrigation guys shoot for during the growing season. 27 acre inches. All right? So if Mother Nature gives them 10 inches of rain, they're going to have to pump 17 inches to get to that level to reach. And they're trying to raise 225 to 250 bushel corn on those irrigated circles. All right? So 27 is kind of the magic number during the growing season. All right? That's what they need during the growing season. But that's only approximately half of this. All right? So that's only approximately half of this. So where are you going to get the other 30 inches of moisture? Okay? And the bottom line is this, is that we're going to look at trying to build a subsoil moisture profile that when that plant reaches high stress, which is June, July, okay, that it's going to have its root system here so that it can pull more moisture and more nutrients at production. Okay? So the way I build my subsoil moisture profile is very important to be able to relieve that plant of stress in June and July. So, but if I have compaction zones in here, it's very difficult to build off-season moisture. Okay? Have to have a lot of hydraulic pressure to do that. And so we're going to look at this process. So what happens is in this field, you'll get a rain, and you get enough rain that you start to get saturation, or starts to get infiltration, and where your water starts to move down there. And then once it reaches this level, it's going to stop right there. And the reason it's going to stop, obviously, is because the crushing effect, and the water is going to back up until you have 100% saturation, and then you have standing water. Soil scientists will tell you to push water through a 2-inch compaction zone at 8 to 12 inches deep. It will take 120% of field capacity, moisture-wise, to push the water through that zone, meaning you have to have hydraulic pressure to push. 120% means you got to have standing water. Now, where I grew up, we didn't have flat ground. We had slope ground. How hard is it to get standing water on slope ground? Really hard. All right? So that puts you at a disadvantage. So what we're working at is what has been the answer in the past to relieve this pressure. Okay? And certainly different practices and different tire sizes and different weight. And what we do has been taking care of symptoms, but it's not addressed the entire problem. So what we've gone to relieve that has typically been mechanical. And that is, we're going to rip it. Okay? And chisel plows will just ride right on top of that zone. Boom, boom, boom. You got to have a deep or shank tillage operation to move it down underneath that to fracture the soil. Unfortunately, there are negatives that go along with doing that operation. One is cost, and I've talked to many different growers throughout the years, and it can range from $25 to $50 an acre to do it, or more, depending on who's doing it and when, to get to that fracturing point. Okay, but not everybody likes that. Some people do no-till, but we start looking at soil profiles, and if I go out and take this penetrometer and go out in your field, I will think it tells usually a story that you either do or don't want to see. Okay, and as a general rule, when you reach that zone, at about an 8-inch level or below, you're going to reach at least 200 psi. Water is restricted at 150 psi or above. If water is restricted, guess what else is restricted? Root systems. Because your root systems follow water. They're not buffet oriented like we are. We go to the buffet and we go down the buffet getting the food. These root systems are programmed to go after the moisture content. They will follow water. So we're going to have to do something about these zones, and we're going to have to do something that's economical and makes more sense. Okay? Now that's been our mechanical answer, and there's a lot of V-shaped rippers and ripper systems sitting in fence rows because farmers have just not liked to use it. But the issue has become fairly prevalent that these implements are actually been upgraded to implements that look like this. That's I think a 7 or 9 shank ripper, pull type. Goes down to about 18 inches deep, or deeper if you'd like for it to, because you need it to, because this is the way that we solve some of these compaction issues. What type of issues that we're seeing? Now this is a 400 horsepower and this is a 600 horsepower tractor. All right, and they got real small fuel tanks on them. It only takes 300-400 gallons to get you going for the day, and then you're off to the races. And what happened is that mechanically was an answer to solving some of the issue of removing compaction. The problem was guys started figuring out, this is a lot like plowing. It's not a very wide implement. I'm going to spend a lot of time on it, and it costs me a lot of money. It's hard on my equipment. It's hard on the tractors because you're working the snot out of them. So, but this has been the answer, and these implements were highly sought after and hard to get a hold of for a number of years because you could drive around the countryside and you can see stuff like that. Okay? Fall tillage with a ripper system. If you see that, which I've seen a lot of it, that's not 2 to 3 inch compaction zones at 8 inches deep. Okay, that's a 8 to 12 inch compaction zone between the 8 and 12 or 8 16 inch deep levels. So you're starting to see this process. Not every year, but if you have a number of wet years in a row, and you get in and do fall tillage, you're going to see something like that. But the process, as I share with you guys, is that this was the answer to that, but I always ask myself, is it sustainable? Is it something that's going to continue to work year after year after year, and you're going to want to do it? And the answer is, well, no, because the new answer to these problems that we see here are cover crops. That's, if you look at, for the past 3 or 4 years, when you look at the High Plains Journal, you look at Farm Journal, you look at all of them, what are they talking about? Cover crops, cover crops, cover crops. All right, I grant that cover crops have some significant value, but are they sustainable? And that's the question when you read the articles that you have to kind of dig into. The question is that, hey, how much does it cost to put a cover crop down? Well, anywhere, estimates are around $30 to $50 an acre every year. Great. I said, so what are you trying to accomplish? 3 things: erosion control, putting nutrients back in the soil, and compaction relief from those deeper rooting systems. But the process is what is it doing to your off-season moisture? That moisture you're trying to build, your subsoil moisture, well, you got a crop on the ground that's uptaking moisture that should be going to reserve for your production crop. And then in the spring, if you don't get it killed, how much water did it take from your production crop? And if you have a trouble the rest of the year with it killing out, which is not unusual, you have a problem. So does cover crops work in those senses? Yes. Is it a sustainable process? Question, and the verdict is still out on that, but we've gone through the ripping. We've gone through the cover crop programs now. We're still searching as growers for options, okay? And that's really where I want to go with this. But yes, sir. Well, that's actually a very good point, is that any type of tillage operation creates a crushing below the tillage. Anything below your tillage always crushes. So you're just moving, a lot of times you're just moving your compaction lower and keeping things better above, but you still have a compaction zone below. I mean, this isn't rocket science. This isn't something you guys don't know. But a lot of times putting it up on the screen and talking about it, you go, oh yeah, I remember that now. But in the first 10 years, 7 years, as I talked to growers, I'd say, what about your compaction? Well, I haven't got any. Okay, I haven't got any compaction. I said, really? I said, okay, well, let's go test this out. So you go take that compaction meter out there and you go start testing it. Well, there's some here because we did this. Or this is where we turn around the end of the field. Or this is where we, well, okay. So let's talk about this. in 2009, there was an article came out in the Farm Journal called Compaction Reaction. It was pretty comprehensive. One of the things they pointed out in there was they took these NDVI images, which is basically a picture of a field, and it's processed through a computer, and it tells the density of the vegetation. So thus, natural density vegetation index. So they could say, okay, here's this field, and the darker the vegetation, obviously the healthier the plant, the thicker the plant, the foliage. This was a water spot, or a rounded out area. But then once we get the density of the vegetation, then we can convert it to a yield estimate based on the density. And we can give you yield estimates for your field, but it allows you information about how to do different things in different parts of your field. Now this is corn. This is a soybean field, obviously in hill ground, because these are the ditches. And then this is converted to yield based on the color. The reason I show that to you is that's cool, but the reason in the article it pointed out, they said, well, the computer system from the pictures could point out every row of the tractor tracks and where the planter tracks were in that field. And they estimated that the rows that were affected by the tractor tracks, and the planter tracks, usually is 4 rows, at least 4 rows per pass. The yield was down 17% in those rows. Okay, you can get the article, go online, look it up, and you'll see the same thing. But just planting your field produces some compaction problems, let alone what you've produced that you've not dealt with, or you have issues that you have to work with. So when somebody says I don't have compaction issues, I say, well, you must not be planting anything, because if you're running on the ground, you're doing something to crush that soil, okay? So we got to keep ahead of it. And this is kind of a cool little slide that goes along with, as my axle load increases, obviously as the weight increases, we have crushing. This started with a 1,650-pound axle load at 12 pounds on the tire. That's very similar to a pickup axle. But as you add a little more weight to each time, you can see a crushing at 1,650 at 16 inches deep, 3 pounds of pressure. So that gives you a crushing effect. When you increase the moisture, if you keep the weight the same, see they increased the weight on this, there they had the same weight, but as you increase the moisture in the profile of the soil, how much difference the push was based on the moisture. So weight and moisture, which are the two things we deal with, because growers today didn't have, when they say, well, I'm going to pick up another 300 or 500 acres this year and farm that, Mother Nature doesn't go, oh, okay, I'll give you 2 more weeks. Mother Nature seems to go, whack, I'll give you 2 less weeks. So the process is that technology allows us to go when it's wetter and be in there earlier and putting pressures on that we didn't do before. So the industry, as a general rule, and I'm not talking about every grower, but the industry in general rule is taking people to the fact that we're putting so much pressure on our soils today that we have to really have a different program. And that's what we've worked with for, like I said, almost 15 years now. We've worked with the APSA program that you'll be able to take home tonight to be able to give you another tool in your toolbox. And I think you'll be excited about what we can do there. The history behind how this program started, I don't know if you remember this, but on the front of the Farm Journal, this was a gentleman by the name of Mike Peterson. Mike was the premier guy in the country for at least a decade in the industry of knowing soil profiles and root system development. And he would go take a backhoe, they'd go dig that pit in your field, and he would spend a day or two there really studying the structures of your soil and what the root systems were doing and how you could improve that. So Mike was in a farmer's field in Hagler, Nebraska. It was a circle irrigation field, and the farmer's name was Stan Evans. And Mike asked Stan, he says, what do you think you've been doing different than your neighbors have? Because you're getting more yield with less population. And he says, you've got things here that I've never seen before in this part of the country, particularly you got corn root systems over 66 inches deep. He goes, what are you doing different than your neighbors? And Stan's like, well, nothing that I could really think of, but he said, so they went back through it step by step. Well, Stan had been using APSA 80 as a surfactant with these chemicals at 5 ounces to the acre. They've been doing it for almost 20 years. And And that was a heavy rate for using it with as a surfactant for chemicals. So he could probably have done got the same kind of kills maybe at 2 ounces, but he'd been using 5, and he'd been doing it multiple times during the year as he sprayed his crops. Well, Mike's the one that put the 2 pieces together. And he's not, he doesn't work for NutriPlant or APSA. He's an independent soil scientist, research scientist for the USDA. So, but he put the connection together. He said, of course, he had a degree in soil science and done through all the processes. He said, but the golf course industry for years and turf industry for years have used surfactants to help them, with water management, using less water on the golf courses and also reducing their compaction on those turf fields and sports fields that would allow the root systems and the plants to do much better. Golf courses have done it for years. He said nobody's really applied doing the same type of treatment to soils that are production farmland. 2 reasons. One, on the golf course you only have maybe 100 acres. Or you're only treating maybe 30 acres total. So it was expensive, and so it was a smaller area. And so there was 2 or 3 other products that were on the marketplace at that time. So in 1997, that was 1996, 1997, Mike Peterson said, I would like to do a study if you guys would be in with that. I'd like to take it to the Irrigation Research Foundation because they're, like I said, the premier guys in the country when it comes to that. And let's test this to see if it works. So from 1997, 98, and 99, they did a 3-year test to see if APSA 80 or any type of surfactants, because they were testing 3 other products at a time, could accomplish the goals that they were looking for. And in effect, they found that the other 2 products did have positive impacts, but their rates were 1.5 gallons to the acre, and one was 1 gallon to the acre. So their cost was $25 to the acre, or $27 to the acre, versus APSA was doing it with 15 ounces rather than 128. Rather than 1 gallon, they could do the same thing with 15 ounces for $3 an acre. So the other 2 products dropped out of the test, dropped out of the marketplace, because it was not sustainable. And so they finished the test. They published a paper, which you can get a copy of. We can give it to you. And it was presented all over the world. And it was co-authored by Mike Peterson and signed by him, saying that this is a viable alternative for compaction relief. All right? So this is how it started. An accident. Kind of like a lot of things we end up with in our marketplace today. It was by accident. Somebody found something that worked. Okay? So just to give you just a little step back a little bit, been around for a number of years. It is chemical enhancement or surfactant processing. We would apply a 2 to 5 ounce rate depending on the herbicide and the process that you were trying to accomplish. Our water management application, 15 to 30 ounces and applied directly to the soil. And you can do that with herbicides and whatever, but you want to get it direct on the soil because now you want it to help your water. Okay? So the chemical enhancement, you guys are familiar with this. You spray a leaf, and depending on the amount of surfactant, if they have any in the product, this was, I believe, Roundup Max. That is about a 90-minute window for absorption, and you can see it still bubbled up. Some of it's going to roll off, some of it's going to evaporate before it goes into the leaf, and so you do lose some. But when you apply APSA at that 2 to 5 ounce rate, that's what it looks like on your leaf. And you're talking about an absorption rate at 100% at 28 minutes rather than 90. So we know that works. We've seen it. You guys have seen it. So it's important to note that we're doing things, not anything different than what you know today, but we're applying it in a different application. Because when we put it on the soil, we're doing it to reduce the surface tension of the water and not change your soil. We're not trying to change the soil. So always the click is people say, well, your test results are from Colorado. That's not Andrew County, or that's not Buchanan County, or that's not Gentry County. Nope, I said because I know on your farm and the farm ground that you have right now that all your soils are exactly the same. Your fields are all exactly the same soil types and processes, right? Well, no, I said exactly. Soil on one part of the county is different than soil on the other part of the county. I'm not trying to change your soil. I'm not trying to change the soil that you have today. What I'm trying to do is change the water, whether the water works in your soil. All right? That's why where the testing is done is somewhat irrelevant to what happens on your farm, because we're trying to work with the water, not the soil. And how that works, you'll be able to see here in just a minute. But so our goals are, if we're going to spray it on the soil, we want the water to be penetrate into the soil faster, so we have less runoff, less water loss due to evaporation, and we're going to capture and use water that we've never been able to use before. The Irrigation Research Foundation has done multiple tests, but these are scientific tests done with scientific instruments to show you a number of things. 3 things you look for in water management: how fast the water moves off the profile into the soil, or infiltration. 44% increase. So I'm going to take the water off the top of the soil, move it into the profile 44% faster than without treatment on your soil. My hydraulic conductivity is increased 17%. What does that mean to you? Remember when I said when you get to push water through a 2-inch compaction zone at 8 to 10 inches deep, you got to have 120% field capacity. 120% field capacity to give you the hydraulic pressure to move it through. But if I have my soil treated or my water treated, it only takes me maybe 105%, 103% of soil saturation to give me hydraulic pressure to move it through that zone. So I'm improving that process. And then the third thing is soil absorptivity, 70% increase, which means how well I bind the water to the profile of the soil. I bind water to the particle of the soil. Water is gravitational. It wants to move, it wants to move down. It's gravity controlled. We've got to stop that. We've got to slow that down. And that's one of the big things that we can show you here in just a few minutes how that works. So when I go to use APSA 80, if I want to use it for a compaction aid or water management, I'm going to look at a 15 or 30 ounce. What's the cost, or what's the input cost for that? For 15-ounce rates, about $5, a little over $5.50. All right, for 30-ounce rate, it's about $10 or about $11. Okay, so you're looking at that type of input if you're trying to reduce your compaction zones, which that'll ROI every time. But if you go back to just using it as a herbicide enhancement, maybe 2.5 ounces to 5 ounces, insecticides, fungicides, irrigation aids, and turf dry spot control. Okay. One thing to remember is you cannot apply soil compaction rates with post-emergent herbicides. You can't put it on over the top of a crop because it's too hot. That surfactant makes that way too hot. So when a Roundup Ready, if you're spraying Roundup over a Roundup Ready crop, you can't run at 15 or 30 ounces. You can do 5 ounces or less. Okay? Just wanted to clarify that to make sure. What's the problem with our water? Yes, sir?
If you put that on your herbicide, will that 5 ounces go towards that 30 ounces?
No, because most of it will all be absorbed in the leaf. Yeah, particularly the more canopy you have. Okay, so we always kind of a general rule of thumb: 5 ounces is going to be lost to the leaf surface if you have canopy or close to canopy. Okay, but good question. All right. The problem we have with our water is that it's called surface tension. Surface tension is measured in dynes. That's the angle of that ball of water. Okay, and you've all seen the ball of water somehow, whether you filled your glass up a little bit fuller, and the little edge on the glass, that's surface tension, and that's a high contact angle. So we have to reduce the contact angle to get water to move and do what we need to do. Rainwater, unfortunately, comes in at about 72 dynes. Okay, and dynes is a measurement of how much tension there is. But water treat or soil that has APSA on it that you get a rain with, the rainwater attaches itself to the APSA, can move that dynes to 50 or below. Okay, which when you get to 50 or below, you now have an active water source in your profile. So it's fairly important. Okay, that continuing to realize is that we're going to work on the water, not necessarily the soil. Now, how does it really work? Why does it work across the board in such a wide spectrum? Well, I always have that question. It's like, well, my soil's different, or this field's different than that field. I say, well, let's just go on the spectrums. One spectrum is, let's say that sand is on one end and clay's on the other, and everybody's in between somewhere. And most guys will go with that and say, yeah, that's true. I said, so what's the problem with our sand? When you have real sandy soil, you have a leaching problem. Your water, the blue line, the water tends to move through it too fast. It gets away from your root zones too quickly, and it takes your chemicals and your nutrients with it, because those are binding to your water as well. So it has lower, that's why they call it the desert. It gets away, all right? But when you apply APSA to that sand and then the water picks it up, because the water has to bind with the APSA, that's what the water is, a carrier. And so as it moves through the profile, it now, because your absorptivity has increased 70%, will attach itself to the particle of sand. So now you have a moisture content on each particle of sand. It retains the moisture longer, higher in the root zone, also capturing your nutrients and or your chemicals and holding them in those levels better than if you had not treated them. So that's in a high leaching scenario, that's how it was. It slows the water down. Remember, water's gravitational. It wants to move down. We got to slow it down, all right? Now, the flip side is that clay, on the other spectrum, is like a block. You know, there's a lot of blocking systems there, and the water tends to stand on top. If you have gumbo or ever been around gumbo ground, if you dig down, what you're going to find is clay, usually 2 to 3 foot of clay underneath that somewhere. And the water just stands on top, creates that nice special gumbo dirt that just is grows such a great crop. Okay? It dries out, and when it dries, the cracks are, you can fall into it and break your ankle. Okay? That's what gumbo ground is. And then the reason is because that water stood so long on that topsoil, it's changed the complexity of the soil. It's sour smell, just like when standing water stands for a long time. So that's what happens there. But there are fissures and cracks in clay. And you know that clay is your highest moisture content holding soil. It will hold the moisture of any soil type you have. All right? But you got to get the water to it. So those fissures and cracks are available. So when I lubricate my water or make it where there's less dynes, I can now move water through those cracks and fissures a lot better than I could before. And then if I combine it with a high PSI crop tip or a root tip, like corn. Corn has a 300 PSI root tip pressure. So it will follow water. Remember? Roots follow water, not food. But in their life, their food is in their water. So that's the way that this works, whether you're on one end of the spectrum or the other. What we're trying to do, and this picture is this, is that manage the water in the profile of soil. Rather than it just being gravitational, rather than letting Mother, no matter how many times I do this, which way does the water go? It goes down, okay? And I mean, there's nothing that I can do physically, to make it go up, okay? It's going to fall out and it's going to go down. But I can change the speed in which it does that, and I can change the direction in which that water will move, all right? And we'll show you how in just a few minutes, okay? So before I go into that side, let's talk to you just a few minutes about some of the processes to watch this process kind of work right in front of your eyes, okay? First thing I'm going to do, these are peat moss pellets. They use them in the seed starter. You've probably used them before. They're peat, but they're hydrophobic. They're dried plant material, so it's somewhat difficult for them to absorb water very quickly. But I'm going to treat one with a little bit of APSA there, and put a little bit of water on those. We'll mix them up, and then I'm going to be very delicate, put about the size of a $50, $quarter $50, okay? Now, of course, I know all your ground is perfectly flat. All of you have perfectly flat ground. But if I want to change the speed in which I want to put water into the profile, let me treat that soil. Any difference in the speed in which that water is going into the cardboard, okay? 44% faster infiltration rates than without being treated. That water will stand on that cardboard for hours because of surface tension. How fast is that absorbing compared to it? And if you look at these two peat moss pellets, you can certainly see a difference. These pots here are treated. One is treated and one is not. And we'll watch those processes work. Now, the other process is watching what surface tension does to water. What's happened to the water on the apple? Running off? Okay. And of course, I made a mess. Turn on the agitator. It's mechanical. What happens to the water? Good part is, it won't hurt you much. There you have a product that if you're spraying on pastures, you don't have to take the cows off. Doesn't hurt the animals, doesn't hurt you. So you got a product that's certainly safe and easy to maintain. Now, if your field or your pasture is sloped, what's going to happen to your water? Same amount of water basically on both pieces of cardboard. Which one do you want to have? And the water didn't go through the backside. It didn't just run through it. But what it did is you now have the ability to start to store your water in your soil. Sorbativity means it binds itself to the particles. Okay? So those are things that you're certainly looking at to do, to try and accomplish. And I always say, if you look at, if you have a field, and we have showers come through, which field would you want to have? And if you're really trying to manage your profiles, you probably ought to be using APSA. Okay? That piece of cardboard's been like that for years, and it's still there. Okay? So, you know, if I'm a grower and a light shower comes through, where do I want to be? Okay? Those quarter-inch showers, those half-inch showers that evaporate before you ever get a chance, what if I could pull them in and put them into the profile? On my pastures, what am I thinking about? You see those pasture rejuvenation programs. What is the number one input of all things that grow? Water. He gets a prize because he's the first one that said that. In all the meetings I've done, you're the first one that, you know, yeah, we give him a tool here. You can take that home with you. Scratch your back. And in reality, let's think about it. I mean, we spend a lot of time looking at the right seed. We spend a lot of time looking at what fertilizers we're going to plant, what chemicals we're going to use. We look at all these things, and we jump clear over the thing that's the most important input that we have for anything that grows, right? Our water. And how do we manage it? So I'm talking about investing in those fields so that you can now manage your water, okay? And have a better opportunity for it to be available for your plant. And you'll notice in these cups how fast the water's starting to move into the treated versus the not treated. You can see it over on that side. So, and now look, there's still water here. All the water's been absorbed. And obviously you're starting to increase the size of that pot. Okay? So, any questions? I mean, I think visually.
Like on your pastures, what rate would you use?
I would want first to go probe it. Once you probe it, we typically would like to see a pretty heavy rate the first time out on a pasture because you've got some serious problems, particularly when you hay, where you hay and those issues are pretty deep. I would recommend, you know, a lot of times a 45-ounce rate, first time out, do it in the fall or spring, early spring, and then come back the next fall or spring and do a 30-ounce rate, and then a 15 after that down the road. So, but you can probe along the way and kind of get an idea where you're at and what's going. But the neat part about, you know, typically your hardest compaction zones in a pasture are on the crowns, where you have the most traffic, not necessarily down closer to the fence rows or the ditches, if you look at it that way. So, you know, you can deal with pastures typically have a lot of variation in some of those areas. So, but
Well, no, like that had, you know, the grass there.
uh-huh.
About how much would that grass tie up?
Not very much, because you're usually putting it on in the fall and spring when it's dormant. And the rain is going to wash it all off. Yeah. And if you can apply it when it's raining, it's even better, or on top of the snow. because the snow is going to take it on down with it. It's the carrier, it's just moisture. So you're not going to lose much to foliage at that point because it's not uptaking much at that level. So, but I'm glad you asked that question. Very good question. Okay, but it can still be applied when it is green, but you'd really like to kind of watch and see when you're going to get a rain, because you'd like to put it on, pre-rain. And we're always good at doing that. We're always good at catching the rain right before it happens. But those are excellent questions. So now that you've seen that, here's an accident that happened. This company was called Earth Tech. They were testing at the Irrigation Research Foundation, and they were testing on a circle that was also had half the field was treated with APSA and half that wasn't. And what their business was is they monitor the moisture, percent of moisture in the profile in irrigation fields, and they can basically electronically turn the pumps on and off for the farmers, or give them data each morning to tell them what the moisture content is. They put probes all around the field, and that's what their business is. But their readings were getting skewed, and they didn't understand it. And here's what they brought to the IRF, not to us, but to the IRF, and they said, from midnight to midnight in that 24-hour window, the one side of the field, which was the control side, the blue line, the water continued to go down, and typically plants will uptake from midnight to noon or about stress time, and then they kind of go into a siesta because it gets stressful, and they quit uptaking until sometime closer late in the evening. So, but the water content continued to drop, even though the plant stopped uptaking. But on the red line, which is the APSA side, the plant, the actual water percent of moisture in the soil, stabilized after the plant went into dormancy, or went into remission at that point, and the water content actually stabilized and actually came back a little bit. Because if you can pull water horizontally or vertically in the profile, you're actually pulling water back into the root zone. So we've known it did this. We've just never seen any scientific proof about it. And they ran this. We wanted a 3-year test on this process. We got 2 years. Earth Tech got bought out by another company, and they quit testing. So we only got 2 years of that window. We've known it did that. We just never had a test to show it. And now we can kind of say, here's why. Look at the difference in those two. Okay, that's how you move water horizontally in the profile. Okay. So, and this is a visual, kind of a visual representation. We copied what they did at the Corn College out in Illinois a few years back. They were showing infiltration rates, and they were showing water usage in their profiles. And so it's 6-inch glass. So we took, and what we did is we went and dug a Missouri river bottom, and we took the different layers of soil in the river bottom, and then that's all topsoil in this V. And of course your question is going to be, why is it in a V? Okay, because mine was. I'm going, why'd they put it in a V? Well, they said, because you need hydraulic conductivity or pressure to do this test so we can show you in a couple of days while you're here versus 2 weeks. So that's why it's in a V, to create hydraulic pressure, all right, because you get standing water in that V. So they put a gallon of water in each of those buckets, and basically same hole size, and they started letting the water loose. And you can see the standing water in both of these at this point. And this is at 210. Okay, this is the control side. This is the APSA side. By 312, look at the standing water over here. Look at the standing water here, and look at the difference in the absorption. By 410, standing water here. The water has been here, but it's now down to here. Look how much more moisture. In fact, we're seeing moisture in these corners down here. Okay, there's a tremendous amount of hydraulic pressure here. At 5, the water's standing here, the water's standing here. By 7, now we're almost getting full saturation here, so the water's starting to back up. So on the treated side versus the untreated side. And then by 10 p.m., we got about 90% saturation level over here and about 80% over here, but you had a lot higher hydraulic pressure over here. So, and then by the next morning, the soil became totally saturated, and this side over here, that area there, never saturated for 2 weeks. And it kind of goes through, if you get a chance to come up here and dig in these dirt piles. This dirt has been treated, not treated. This is the control side. Okay, And this is the APSA treated at 15 ounces. And all of a sudden you can see, and the only difference is they had the same amount of moisture on them, but the difference is this, is that if you take a moisture probe in here, it's all over the board. Every time you stick it in, you get a different reading of your moisture content of your soil, whether it's 30%, 15%, 10%, 40%. And the reason is because your moisture is concentrated throughout your soil profile. But by evening out my profile, by the moisture being in it, it dries at the same content, and all of a sudden your ground becomes more fallow, and it becomes very more crumb-like. And so now that thing that you see in all the trade journals about seed to soil contact and how important that is for uniform emergence, where you do not create competition in your plants. You know, a small plant is just a weed. We want all those plants to come up at the same time, to have about the same height, so they're, you know, they're not robbing from each other, and they're not killing those plants out. But if you get a chance to come up here and dig around in that soil, I think you'll see the difference as well. And that's clearly what you're starting to see, is the evenness of the moisture content in the profile, and why it's so important. For those yields, those guys that are pushing yields, this is a very, very important process, okay? So what would my water management program be? We really like to start, for good reason, the first year at 30 ounces. Now, if we go out and probe and see, you know, you don't have some of the issues that would cause that, you could probably start at 15, okay? But that's why we want to go do that. But 30 ounces is the best place to start. You'll see visible differences that first year. 15 is going to give you an effect, okay? But 30 is going to give you better the first year. It's kind of like front-loading an antibiotic. Take 2 the first time, so you kind of start front-loading it. Second year, probably dropping back to a 15 ounce unless you've got significant problem areas. And then the third year, more of a maintenance at 15 ounces to the acre. So that's kind of where you're headed with that. Yeah, but it can all be adjusted given particular soil problems or conditions. Pastures may require more work because they've got some more issues, or your alfalfa fields, okay? So the irrigation research test results, like I said, I'm going to give you the paper. You're going to get the paper to take home. But there was a couple of 2 or 3 tests here I want to show you that are really quite significant, I think. One is soil temperature gradient and optimum nutrient uptake. The plant scientists will tell you that corn loves 53-degree temperature. Their maximum uptake for their nutrients and water in the root systems, they like 53-degree temperature soil. That's when they uptake the fastest and the most. So where is that level in your soil? Well, at the Research Foundation in April, that temperature soil is about 8 inches deep for this year, for the year they took the test. In May, it's about 15 inches deep. In June, it's about 25 inches deep. In July, it's 45 inches deep. And in August, it's a little about 50 inches deep. Well, what's interesting about that is they followed the root systems to say how long were the root systems in that sweet spot when it wasn't treated only 19% of the time. Well, that's not what you really want. So what's happening is that temperature zone is moving faster than your root systems are moving in your profile, so your corn's not doing as well as you'd like. At a 15-ounce application rate, 48% of the time, those root systems stayed in the zone, which is a lot better. So I got a better chance, and that's part of that. That's part of that that research that I shared with you guys, in the fact of how fast or how well, if this is the top of the soil, how fast are my root systems moving, how fast is my water moving, and how fast is my temperature moving, and can I keep my root systems in the maximum zone more often than not. I'm not going to be able to do it every time, but what happens is, because of our compaction zones, because of the way we start our seeds, because of a number of reasons, we're all out of sync. Our root systems aren't moving at the same pace our water is, our water's not moving the same pace as our temperature is, and vice versa. We're all out of sync. And this is precision farming. When it gets right down to it, these little details is what you're trying to accomplish on your field, okay? At the 30-ounce rate, only 52%. It didn't just double it at 30 ounces. So that may tell you that 15 may be a more optimal process for you to reach that level, depending on what's going on in your field, okay? This is a one-year test, and I'm not touting a one-year test, but this shows something that's so significant that it's good to talk about it. This was a field that had dry land and drip irrigation testing side by side. It was a 30-acre field, and they had 10 inches of rain during the growing season. So it wasn't a very good year moisture-wise. So the control raised 78 bushel corn, not too hot. But with 15 ounces applied for $5, $5.50, it went to 92 bushel. 14 bushel to the acre increase for $5.50 input. And the 30-ounce application went to 108 bushel, 30 bushel to the acre more. But you're talking about a high-stress situation. This is a drought-type situation. So you've helped the scenario here tremendously with what you've done, okay? Now, the other side of the field is drip irrigated. So it got 27 inches total. So it got 10 plus 17, 27 inches. It raised 131 bushel corn. With APSA at 15 ounces, raised 142 bushel corn. 11 bushel to the acre increase. All right? The 30-ounce rate went to 139, actually a little lower. You're going, why? Why did it go down? Well, the major reason why is you've controlled one of your stressors. You've added water to it to control that stressor of the water, so it was at nil point, the extra application rate. So that's a good point. If you have an irrigated field and you're controlling your water with a little bit of testing and understanding, 15 may be your time frame. So I show those to you because I don't want you to always see that more is always better, more is always better, more is always better. There are sweet spots here that we try and get growers to look at that gives them the best return on their dollar, okay? And that's why I show you, most most farmer meetings you went to, they would never show that to you, all right? But I like to show it to you because I think it's important. So IRF testing for 9 years proved that we did 17 bushel to the acre more on the average by using the 15-ounce rate, okay? So we feel like that's significant after 9 years of testing. At $4 corn, which we're not there, but we're not that far away, that's a $70 an acre increase, or increased profit, minus, and then you take out your $5.50, okay? So that looks good. This is compacted soil with strip tillage for 5 years, 22 bushel to the acre more, $57 an acre input, or increase. Corn root depth at 90% plant growth, 30% increase in our root depths. That's a good point for subsoil moisture. And we had a good question at the noon meeting. They said, well, what about our nitrogen? Is this going to make our nitrogen go down faster because the water's moving better? Remember, I said we want to get it off the surface, but then we want to slow it down, right? That's what I've said. So that's what the data has all shown. But the normal testing that they did at the Research Foundation for nitrogen leaching was from 24 to 48 inches. And what they found was, at 15 ounces, the amount of nitrogen went down. And then 30 ounces, it went down even more. So their first initial thought process was, this is taking the nitrogen down with it too fast. That's not good. But then they thought, but maybe we should test the whole profile. So they went back, instead of 24 to 48 inches, they tested from 0 to 48. They tested the whole profile. And now look what happened. The control to 15, the pounds of nitrogen went up when you tested the whole profile. What that what that showed is the fact that if this is the 0 to 48, or this is the 0 to 24, 24 to 48, is that I'm probably keeping my nitrogen higher in the zone because I'm attaching it to the water. Obviously, the water attaches to the sorbitivity, and I'm connecting my water to my soil profile, so I'm slowing the nitrogen down. It's not getting into that 24 to 48 inch level nearly as fast. That's why it went down. Does that make sense, or am I just, I hope so. If not, we'll try and clear that up as best as possible, okay? Here, I've got data on drip irrigated, stacked corn, high pH corn, across the board. A lot of them, you'll see that on the sheets. 5 years of testing for soybeans, 5.2 bushel increase. That's $36 increase at $7 soybeans an acre for $5.50. That's pretty good. How'd we do on 3 years of alfalfa? 1.7, almost 1.8 tons more of alfalfa with the 15-ounce rate. That's pretty good. Our relative feed value in alfalfa increased the relative feed value 1.8 units. All right. Winter wheat, on irrigated winter wheat, 8.3 bushel to the acre on a 2-year test. For dryland winter wheat, 1.7 bushel. It was, I think it was skewed a little bit because of a couple of drought years there, but didn't show as well as we'd liked. But APSA 80 comes in that 2.5 and 30-gallon drum. The prices I quoted you were a 30-gallon drum price. Okay, just a little bit more when you convenience down to a 2.5 gallon. So, anyway, any questions on APSA and the way that it works or what it might do? It's fairly compelling when you look at these tests and what that's doing right in front of your eyes and how you can move water. Remember, you're moving water vertically. You're moving water against its natural tendency. And that's what you really are trying to accomplish. Okay?